To me, we are the most beautiful creatures in the whole world.
Looking at this generation, feeling hopeless. Looking across my shoulder, keep my eyes open, keep my mind focused. Ain't no hocus pocus.
Hi everyone, welcome to Bottom Line, first annual Juneteenth Celebration. Come on in, turn your mic on mute, and go ahead and stop sharing your videos to that. We'll get started shortly. We're just waiting for everyone to log in.
No one put you down. Let me see you smile. And don't cry, daughter. And don't cry, baby. Get up, my son, if they can hold you back. And don't cry, children. Shine, shine. You're beautiful inside. Rise up, rise up. Don't you know you can fly? The darker the berry, the sweeter the juice.
Hi, welcome to just joined us, and Alexander will be your host today. Come on in, go ahead and turn your mics on mute and turn off your videos. Thanks.
Let no one put you down. Let me see you smile. And don't cry, daughter. Don't cry, baby. Get up, my son, if they can hold you back. And don't cry, children. Shine, shine. You're beautiful inside.
Hi, happy Friday. Welcome to the Bottom Line first annual Juneteenth Celebration. We're so excited to have you with us today. Go ahead and put your mics on
But God knows your
stop sharing
heart.
your screen
They
or
say
your video.
they love you and leave you in the dark. And child, when you fall down, you better get up and go on to show crown. Victory is a word. Don't cry, daughter. Don't cry, baby. Get up, my son, if they can hold you back. And don't cry, children. Shine, shine. You're beautiful inside. Rise up, rise up. Don't you know you can
Hi,
fly?
welcome to Bottom Line first annual Juneteenth Celebration. We'll get started in just a minute.
Let me tell you that 34 years I've been on the battlefield. This is not for the faint of hearts. This is not for the faint of hearts. Protesters, I love you. I want you to protest on to the ballot box.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure. We will be sure. Oh, glory.
What I realize is, which we all know, the lack of unconditional love is why we're in the situation that we are in now.
Yes, glory is destined. Everyday women and men become legends. Sins that go against our skin become blessings. The movement is a rhythm to us.
I swore on the day that my son was murdered that I would not stop until I got justice.
Justice for all just ain't specific enough. One son died, his spirit is revisiting us. True and living in us. Resistance is us. That's why Rosa sat on the bus. That's why we walk through Ferguson with our hands up. When it go down, we woman and man up.
So the question has always been, how do you carry legislation? And it's always with the people. But you know, most of all, how we can get these bills passed, we have to vote. And we got to know who we are voting for. Don't just pick up a ballot and check a box. Do your homework. See what your politician administration's track record was before he got on that ballot. This is how we vote.
Now the war is not over. Victory isn't won. But we'll fight on. We're walking. We're gonna walk until we get everything we need. We'll cry glory. Oh, glory. Oh. We'll cry glory. Oh, glory.
It took me 5 years to get one police officer fired.
So give it up to the mothers. Because if not for the mother of Eric Garner, the mother of Sean Bell, the mother of Amadou Diallo, the mothers, there will not be a movement.
Me is lethal, a king became regal. Saw the face of Jim Crow under a bald ego. The biggest weapon is to stay peaceful. We sing, our music is the cuts that we bleed through. Somewhere in the dream we had an epiphany.
I just want us to be very intentional about the respect that we give each other.
Can win the war individually. It take the wisdom of the elders and young people's energy.
Young people,
The story we call
we passing the torch to you,
of the Lord, my
but you can't be faint of heart. You gotta be in this whole fight.
But that's the reality, my brothers and sisters. That's what we need. Whether we like it or not, we need to hear from the people.
Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, when the war is won, when it's all said and done, we'll cry glory. Oh, glory.
So I want to thank you all for joining us today and welcome you to Bottom Line's first annual Juneteenth celebration. My name is Alexandra Williams-Fleck, and I'll be your host today, presenting live from New York. In just a few short moments, my colleague and friend, Catherine Smith from the New York office, will share with you a history of Juneteenth. As you might know, it's a day of celebration, of liberation within the Black community, but I would be remiss if I didn't take some time to reflect on the present day truth of the Black experience in America and the work that remains to be done. 3 weeks ago, George Floyd was murdered by a police officer over suspicion of using a counterfeit $20 bill at a local grocery store in his Minneapolis neighborhood. Now, I won't go into how, had George Floyd been white, the store might have seized the bill without calling the police, or if they had called, the officers might have questioned Mr. Floyd on how he came to be in possession of the bill, rather than assume malicious intent because of his race. Despite the inundation of footage and media coverage of George Floyd's tragic killing, I didn't sit down to watch his final moments until I had to write these words. But I couldn't watch. Every time I thought about typing it in my search bar, George Floyd death recording, I got sick to my stomach. My heart would start racing and I would be moments away from falling apart. Even in writing this, I've had to step away to compose myself. I can't breathe. On July 17, 2014, Eric Garner died after officers pinned him to the ground in a chokehold for 7 minutes. He repeated those words, "I can't breathe," 11 times before losing consciousness. His death fueled rage and protests within and across communities, prompting the creation of one of the most recognizable symbols of the Black Lives Matter movement, a Black t-shirt with his final words. 8 minutes and 46 seconds later, we're hearing his words all over again. That's how long the officer knelt on George Floyd's neck. Longer than it takes to get your morning Starbucks during peak rush hour. And you know that can take a while. And we're at a point now where when a Black person tells a police officer they can't breathe, the police think we're trying to trip them up rather than demand they restore a basic God-given right. In 2018, Andrew Kears pleaded for medical assistance nearly 30 times in the back of a police cruiser while the officer reported to dispatch he was doing the I can't breathe thing. Yes, Juneteenth is a day of celebration, of liberation. From my ancestors until today, we honor the sacrifices of those that came before us. In power and presence, we lift up our fists and raise our voice in Black excellence, Black family, and Black love. But I'll leave you with 8 reasons to stand with me and face the reality of an America that continues to look upon my brothers and sisters as less deserving of the care and respect that is everyone's basic human right. Laquan McDonald, 17. Jordan Edwards, 15. Kawani Carrington, 15. Cameron Tillman, 14. Nicholas Hayward, 13. Tyree King, 13. Deontay Farrow, 12. Ayanna Stanley Jones, 7. In the words of our 44th president, Barack Obama, change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. Thank you. Now I'd like to hand it over to my colleague and friend, Catherine Smith, who's going to present a history of Juneteenth.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Smith. I work at the New York Bottom Line office as a college success advisor, and I will be presenting on the history of Juneteenth. First, we start off with the Emancipation Proclamation. So the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Abraham Lincoln on September 22nd, 1862, and was made effective on January 1st, 1863. It changed the legal status under federal law of more than 3.5 million enslaved African Americans in the Confederate States from slave to free. Although the Emancipation Proclamation was made effective on January 1st, 1863, slaves in Texas were not notified. The reason why has been unclear, but often told is a story of a messenger who was murdered on his way to Texas with the news of freedom. Another story that is circulated is that the news was deliberately withheld by the enslavers to maintain the labor force on the plantations. Regardless of what the story is, the news never came to them, and 2.5 years later, June 19th of 1865, over 250,000 enslaved people got the news that they were free men and women. Now we use Juneteenth as a way to recount the memories of that great day in June of 1865, and its festivities would serve as motivation for Black people as well as a release from the growing pressures encountered in new territories. The Juneteenth celebration was a time for reassuring each other, for praying, and for gathering remaining family members. So some of the traditions of Juneteenth include former slaves and descendants of slaves traveling to Galveston, Texas, every year on June 19th. In addition to traveling to Galveston for Juneteenth, early customs include eating foods of all assortments. There were various meats such as chicken, fish, and beef. sliced okra, corned beef, and mac and cheese as the main dishes and sides. There would also be strawberry soda and red velvet cake, as many have said that the strawberry soda and red velvet cake is to symbolize the blood of the ancestors that did not make it to celebrate Juneteenth. So we persevere for them. Some of the activities in early Juneteenth celebrations were fishing, barbecues, baseball, and rodeos, as well as dressing to impress. There was also a tradition for former slaves to toss their ragged garments into creeks and rivers as a way of release. Traditions have changed slightly as time went on. In present day, Black people celebrate by playing or watching baseball games, oral readings of the Emancipation Proclamation, and noted African American writers like Maya Angelou, and dressing to impress, of course. The meaning of barbecuing is to share in the spirit and the aromas that their ancestors should and would have experienced. Oral readings and attire are very important for Juneteenth, and is important to be woven into Juneteenth customs, since during slavery there were laws prohibiting books in many areas and limiting the dressing of the enslaved. By the way, the photo on the left is from Juneteenth 1900 in East Woods Park in Austin, Texas, and the photo on the right is of Juneteenth in 2018 on 116th Street in Harlem, which is in New York. So of course, there were some trials and tribulations. Black people were forbidden to use public property to partake in Juneteenth festivities throughout the 1800s, so they had to get creative in ways to celebrate Freedom Day. In the 1870s, former enslaved people saved up to $800 and purchased 10 acres of land in Houston, Texas, and renamed the land Emancipation Park. It was the only public park and swimming pool in the Houston area open to African Americans until the 1950s. Others ended up going to church in order to find a secure place to celebrate their freedom. And eventually, employers gave their workers the day off, and some even gave donations of food and money. The Great Depression made it hard for Black people in rural areas as well as in the cities to find work. Furthermore, employers were less eager to grant leaves to celebrate Juneteenth, so people began participating Juneteenth less and celebrating July 4th, since it was already a national holiday. From the 1940s to the 1970s, in the second wave of the Great Migration, more than 5 million Black people left the southern states for the North and West Coast, introducing the tradition of Juneteenth every chance they had. During the 1950s and 60s, the Civil Rights Movement brought attention of African Americans, expanding freedom and integration. This attention brought positive and negative outcomes for Juneteenth. Some of these examples would be observations of Juneteenth beginning to decline in Texas. However, in Atlanta, some campaigners for equality wore Juneteenth buttons. However, the turning point was the 1968 Poor People's Campaign to Washington, D.C. Reverend Ralph Abernathy made June 19th the Solidarity Day of the Poor People's Campaign.
Juneteenth, it's kind of like independence for Black people in this country.
I know that it is a celebration, and I know it's on June 19th, and I know it has to do with Black history.
No, not at all.
Yes, I think so. Isn't it the day that we officially got our freedom?
It's the actual official day that all slaves in America were free.
2 more years of oppression and enslavement and free labor. There are many rumors as to why they didn't get the message. Some say the officials at the time did not want it to happen until a couple of harvests were made. It was for economic reasons. They wanted to get more money out of the slaves that they had. Some say that one of the men who were taking the message to them was killed on the way by people who didn't want the message to get through. But for whatever reason, a very harmful, oppressive institution was continued. I can't remember ever being taught in one school that I went to about Juneteenth. No one ever gave me that history.
It's a program where everybody that's about the African diaspora, and even those that are not of the African diaspora that help with our struggle, it's a program that everybody can come together and be a part of.
Modern day oppression is still going on. Discrimination and racism, all those things are still going on. So I think that what Juneteenth provides is a forum for us to at least begin a discussion and celebrate, okay, we were freed on this day. And this is not just important to Black people. This is important, this is American history. It is important that everybody knows that Black people were an enslaved people and who ultimately became free at some point, and that this took place in Galveston, but in general, that we came through emancipation, and there's other steps that we have to take.
All right, so the future of Juneteenth. In many ways, Juneteenth represents how freedom and justice in the U.S. has always been delayed for Black people. Present-day Juneteenth celebrates African American freedom and achievement while encouraging continuous self-development and respect for all cultures. We are living in a transformative time in history. We obviously still have a long way to go to reach equality and anti-racism. However, I would like to encourage everyone to envision Juneteenth as a bright day in a very dark time. History has repeated itself, unfortunately, but it is imperative to remember the meaning of Juneteenth. And while we continue to fight for equality, we also ensure that we uplift each other. Carlos Hill, an African American studies professor at University of Oklahoma, said it best: through the Juneteenth holiday, we can begin to really acknowledge and address all of the issues, past and present, tied up in this issue of slavery. Juneteenth does not bring about this change. It would be the dialogue. And for this last slide, I wanted to end on a bit of a light note and show displays of Black excellence as we celebrate Juneteenth. These images depict Black excellence across cultures and generations. That is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Juneteenth. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Kat, for that informative, well thought out presentation on the history of Juneteenth. I think it's important to note that despite widespread observance within the Black community, like you said, Juneteenth is still not a nationally recognized holiday. And I know diversity, equity, inclusion are really popular buzzwords right now, especially in the wake of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and more. So I hope those of you who are joining us today with power to affect change in your respective companies and organizations consider how you might build this observance into your office culture. Now, as Kat also said, today is a day of celebration, and it's not a celebration without music. If you're anything like me, and it's definitely not a Black celebration until somebody pulls out the electric slide. So for those of you who don't know, the electric slide was developed in 1976 by Richard L. Rick Silver, It's popular within the Black community, often showing up at weddings, family reunions, and has been reimagined in many different ways, like the cha-cha slide, the Cupid shuffle, etc. But first up, we have an exciting roster of events up today. We have a panel on allyship and practice. We're going to have a session where many different people who identify as Black have a chance to share their stories. So I hope you'll stick with us throughout the day. But for now, we're going to stop for a little bit of a musical interlude, starting with how to do the electric slide. So give me just a second. I'm going to share my screen so that I don't have to be the one to teach you, because nobody signed up to see that. Liz, maybe you could share it from your end. It says it's disabled. Perfect. Thank you. So I encourage you all to follow along, learn the steps if you don't already do that, if you don't already know them, and then we'll have a couple short songs for you to practice to before we move on.
We're going to teach you the basic form of it. If you already know it, we're going to add some spice to it so that your electric slide can be the best of them all.
All right, so
we start with 4 steps to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then same thing to the left, 4 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then take 4 steps back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you do a little step touch to the front, smack, and back. If you got that much, we add the step kick. The foot that's in front steps, the foot that's in back kicks. Now we're on a new side. This dance repeats over and over again. It's a line dance. So we're gonna start this way. Ready? 4 steps to the right. Here we go. 1, 2, 3 to the left. 1, 2, then we take it back. 1, 2, left foot's in front, we step, kick, start again. 2, 3, 4. To the left, take it back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Step, touch, and kick, okay? Now we're gonna do the electric slide 4 times, adding some variations to it. So the first time it's gonna be pretty basic, and the second, third, and fourth time we're gonna add some spice to it. Ready, Victor?
Yeah.
Okay, 5, 6, to the right. 4 steps.
You wanna have fun with it.
That's right. And a chasse. A variation of the step, the 4 steps. Touch the floor on this one.
Kick it out. Chasse again. Back it up.
Add a lasso this time. Chasse.
Chasse again.
Take it back. Now hit the floor and kick your leg out. Hit the floor, kick your leg out.
Oh. And that's how you do it.
The electric slide.
We hear it over and over from investors. I wish I had.
Oops, apologies for that YouTube commercial break that always happens. We're gonna go ahead and put on some music for you to practice as well, while we wait for the next portion of the event. All right, go ahead. There we go. So we invite you all to take some time, practice the electric slide, get up, stretch your legs, grab a glass of water, do whatever it is that you need to do. Thank you for joining us for this first part of our Juneteenth celebration. After, we'll listen to music for, just about 5 or 6 minutes. And then after that, we're gonna move on into our affinity space. So I wanna thank all bottom line students and external guests who tuned in for this first session. We hope you'll join us again at 12:20 or 11:20 Central if you're in Chicago. Our affinity space will be for Black identifying staff members only by region. So stick around through the music as long as you would like, but then we'll be moving into a very brief staff-only space. We have a couple of great discussion questions for that, and then we'll finish up with a short meditation by John Jones Jr. from our national office.
So enjoy the music, and we'll see you at 12:20. Had a great question over chat. I should clarify the 12:20 event is open to all attendees. So staff, bottom line students, and external guests. That's open to everyone. It's just the affinity space that's coming up in like 2 or 3 minutes that's staff only. All right, I think we have time for one more song before we go into our affinity space.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatical.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I absolutely love singing along to this song. I cannot get as high as she gets, but I try every single time. right, I think that is all we have time for this musical interlude. So thank you for
Singapore. It's one of the greatest growth stories.
Thank you for sticking with us through that. Just a reminder that we are moving into our affinity space, which is for Black identifying bottom line staff members only. So thank you to all students, externals, non-Black bottom line staff who joined us for this first session. We hope to see you again at 12:20, 11:20 Central Time for session. First person shares, people a moment to sign off so that we can move into our affinity space. All right, thank you so much for allowing that little short musical interlude. I first want to say welcome back to everyone who joined us for session 1, and greetings to all of the newcomers. We're excited to have you with us for Bottom Line's first annual Juneteenth. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alexandra, and I work out of our New York office as part of the queer team, and I'm really excited about what's coming next, so let's just jump right in. So as you know, this session is titled Lift Every Voice, borrowed from Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is a poem that was written at the very start of the 20th century by two brothers, James Weldon Johnson and J. Rosamond Johnson. It actually started out as a poem before being put to music and is considered as sort of the Black national anthem. It carries with it messages of liberation and affirmation, faithfulness and freedom, And today we borrow its name and its message to lift up Black voices within our community. So I want to invite during this session any staff, students, board members, corporate or external partners, and guests who identify as Black to share whatever they have on their hearts. It can be a song, it could be a poem, it could be words of affirmation, appreciation, it could be words of frustration over recent events, it can be questions that you think the wider group and wider society needs to consider. All you have to do is just click the raise your hand button and we'll invite you to come on screen and share. But first, I would like to start with a very beautiful rendition of the anthem that was submitted to us by Monica, a bottom line student out of Boston. So let me cue that up for you guys. Oh, it started to play without my 22. There we go. All right. And here we go.
Every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty, rejoicing, rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Thank you, Monica, for that share. And I apologize, toggling between these windows is proving trickier than I would like. I also want to call her out real quick because she submitted it to me and she submitted her video and then she submitted a couple others and she was second guessing her voice and how she sounded. And I told her, as someone who takes voice lessons because they want to be a better singer, if I had her voice, I would be singing all day, everywhere I went, not caring who I bothered. So Monica, absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Now I want to sort of open it up to the larger community. As I said, anyone, whether you're bottom line staff, students, external partners, corporate partners, or guests who identify as Black, if you would like to share, you should be able to raise your hand. There should be a button that you click that says raise hand, and we will invite you on screen to share more widely. Also, if you wouldn't mind checking that you do have the raise hand feature enabled, because I tried to do it myself and I actually couldn't find mine. But I'm also juggling quite a few things here. That is a great question. Where do you go to enable it? Normally it should already be enabled. Participant tab, I see mute and more, but I unmute all. I exit chime, that is unfortunate. All right, so because for whatever reason that seems to be, it seems like some people see raised hands. So it could be that I don't see raised hands because I'm currently co-host, which would totally make a lot of sense. So now that I know that you all have the capability to raise your hands, please raise your hands so that you can share. I'm searching for raised hands. All right, so while we wait for people to come together with what it is they would like to share, I will continue on with some of what has already been submitted. So thank you to those who submitted in advance. Let's start with, here we go. Give me just a second to pull it up and then to share it. For whatever reason, there we go. There we don't go. Okay, here we go. I apologize for the technology. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, perfect.
Hello, everyone. My name is Raina Whitfield. I recently joined the Bottom Line New York Associate Board earlier this year, and I work with TransPerfect, where we've been an employer partner since 2016. Today, I'd like to share a poem written by my late father, Robert Whitfield Jr. I think as a Black man and member of the LGBTQ+ community, his words ring ever so true today, long after his passing. This is a skyrocket wallowing through space. As I walk slowly through the crowded mall, no one can see me, no one at all. I feel like a skyrocket wallowing through space. Why won't somebody look at my face? I gaze at each face as I pass them by, hoping that someone will smile and say hi. Hello, my good man, I love you, I do, and I wish all of God's grace upon you. Sometimes this seems such a lonely place for those like myself who love their race. Thank you.
All right, special thank you to Raina for sharing that with us in advance to be shared today. Now I'm going to open it up once again to the larger community to see if anyone who hasn't previously submitted would like to share something with us today. Y'all can stay silent. I'm gonna keep on asking. I just want to throw that out there. I'm gonna give you guys as many opportunities to share. Of course, you know, no pressure, but this is your time. I'll give it a minute before I move on to one that's already been submitted. Okay, we have a raised hand. I'm going to invite you to share yours, or actually, yeah, I'm gonna spotlight your video. Let's see if that works.
Hi, my name is Danisha. I am from the Bottom Line Chicago region. I don't really have like a poem or anything. I just want to send an encouragement to, of course, the Black community to encourage everyone to continue to be strong during this, because it definitely weighed on the emotional toll that all of this, has when it comes to just, embracing who you are and sharing our struggles and things like that. It can be very hard, very tough. I know it has been me and a lot of my Black friends that I've talked to, very hard, very challenging. I was just always, I just always want to encourage the Black community as a whole to just continue to be strong, continue to care for yourself too through all of this, through care for, your mental health, any self-care tips, anything that helps you to find joy and find comfort and find peace during this time. And I also want to send a special encouragement to Black women, because I know talking to a lot of my Black friends that are women and seeing a lot of Black women on social media, very eager and always jumping to the forefront of these protests and things like that to advocate for Black Lives Matter and things like that. And but unfortunately, sometimes we learn that it's a hard reality that sometimes Black women can even be an afterthought in a lot of things. Like we're still fighting for justice for Breonna Taylor. Still fighting for justice for Tatiana Jefferson, Corinne Gaines. There's so many other names. Kia Boy, that's from Chicago, really the neighborhood that I grew up in, and still haven't seen justice. So yeah, a lot of times, Black women, feel like we're after, like we're there for everyone else, everyone else who's there for us. But I still want to encourage Black women that we are loved, we are special, we contribute so much to this country, this culture. There's so many people that want to be us and look like us in so many ways, but to be honest, no one can be us better than we be us. And appreciate all Black women, no matter, your sexuality, religious practices, rather, you like anime, K-pop, wherever you like art. No matter what your interest in, no matter who you are as a Black woman, I think we all, at the end of the day, we're still Black, we're still, we all still be appreciative, still come together and love one another, cherish one another, and do lift each other.
Thank you so much for sharing those words. I recognize that the sound was a little spotty with her message, and I apologize for that. It could be that system is just a little taxed. So I appreciate what you said about supporting the Black community and particularly Black women, because a lot of the times I agree with you, we're sort of an afterthought, or we're at the end of things. So definitely appreciate that message. Thank you so much. All right, we have a submission of a song that I am going to pull up, that was submitted by Kamel, who said it just really touched her right now with everything else that's going on. So give me a second to share my screen with you all. There we go.
Just gotta get some things off my chest. Tough times, I hope y'all holding up. We'll be alright, cause we always is. But I'm feeling like this.
How many mothers have to cry? How many brothers gotta die? How many more times? How many more times? How many more marches? How many more signs? How many more lives? How many more times? Take a look around. Can you see it now? Don't be colorblind, cause when they're killing mine, they'll try to justify it. Oh, each and every time. Playing in the park, taking you a jog, sitting on the couch in your own house. Never seem to matter what we do. But you're quiet when niggas die. Let the soul about that body that we bury. You a God, now you no longer have to worry. It's so hard to sing these words out loud. All these beautiful, precious black lives lost in the name of senseless white pride. Tears falling from us. How many mothers have to cry? How many brothers gotta die? How many more times? How many more times? How many more marches? How many more signs? How many more lives? How many more times? Tell me, how can you be quiet? You know the language of the unheard is a riot. All we ever see from you is violence. You know you ain't no better if you silent. You talking about the city on fire. Where your rage when my people die. We ain't slaves, let my people fly. Now it's time, watch my people rise. How many mothers have to cry? How many brothers gotta die? How many more times? How many more times? How many more marches? How many more signs? How many more lives? How many more times? How many mothers have to cry? How many brothers gotta die? Tell me. How many more times? How many more times? How many more marches all across the world? How many more signs? How many more lives? Shame I gotta ask. How many more times? I leave you with that.
Mel, thank you so much for submitting that video. It's a gorgeous song, just generally, and I really appreciate the message behind it. In all honesty, I've talked a lot about with people in my lives this idea of activism and what it looks like, and feeling like I haven't been doing my part because I'm not one to go to protests and stand against, riot police. And someone told me that activism doesn't look the same for everyone. And I really appreciated that validation, knowing that there are different ways that you can engage with Black Lives Matter and supporting the Black community. So I really took that to heart, and I hope everyone in attendance today takes that to heart as well, that you don't necessarily have to show up in the protests and yell and scream it from the rooftops, but it's an action, right? Being an ally and supporting the Black community requires action. So, there's talk about the emotional toll that it can take on Black people to have to educate non-Black people around how to be better allies and how to seek out the information that we want, or that you sort of need to know to be a better ally. And I encourage you all to start doing some of that research for yourselves and seeing what next steps you can take. I'm hoping that that's something that our panel touches on later today as well, but that song just really sort of drove all of that home for me even more. So I'm going to take this time to play another one of our pre-submitted submissions, shares for today. Let's go to, here we go. And this will be perfect. All right. Share screen. Here we go.
Hello, my name is Jacques, and I am from Chicago, and I'm actually only half Black. I'm mixed with white, but being half Black means a whole lot more than just 50% of who I am and of what I support. I learned about slavery at a pretty young age, and learning about the atrocities and the disgusting things that have happened to Black people in history made me hate white people, and essentially made me hate half of myself, because I was half white. And I kind of stuck with that for a long time when I was a kid, but I became to understand that society has come to a certain point of equity and equality because Black people have pushed so hard for all this change to happen. And back in the day, it used to be illegal for a Black and a white person to be together and produce an offspring, somebody like me. But because of the efforts that Black people made and pushed through, um, that has changed, and we live in a more equity and a more equal society because of that. And we are still pushing, and there's a lot of changes to be made. But I have massive respect for this holiday, and I really believe that we have a lot more things to change in this world, but we're getting there.
Thank you to Jacques for submitting those words. I think that as a fully 100% Black woman, that's definitely an experience I can't speak to, being of mixed heritage as a Black person, and the different ways in which you navigate multiple spaces, and how going all the way back to that one drop rule and what that means. So it's really interesting to hear first, from a first person point of view, a little bit about what that experience is. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Before I play any more of the pre-submissions, I would love to check in with the audience and see if anyone else would like to share something. You can go ahead, raise your hand. You can drop a link to a song or something that touched your heart in the chat. It doesn't have to necessarily be your face in the camera for us to share. It looks like we have something in the chat, so let's take a look. Okay. Chris, thank you for dropping that. Is that an article you would like us to take a look at together as a group? Is it, or did you see it more as a resource for everyone? You're on mute too.
Thank you. I'm just talking away to myself here. It's a bit long. It's like an 8-minute read, so I didn't want to share all of it with this group, but wanted to share a little bit if I could. So Kimberly Manning is a physician at Grady Hospital in Atlanta, and she's a wonderful writer and talks about her experience caring for patients at Grady Hospital. And this is something that she posted back in February that I read back then and has stuck with me since then. And I'm just going to read part of it again, because it goes on a bit long for this. And it starts with she's making rounds in the hospital. And the patient says, "Do you know the words to the national anthem? This was my last patient, a Grady elder, asked just before I got ready to leave her room on rounds one day. I just asked her if she'd had any questions for me. This was not what I meant." Ugh, were we about to unpack the NFL controversy? I was already tired. I'd had a lot on my plate and had had some pretty fitful sleep the night before. A discussion about the anthem now? I took a drag of air and sat back down. She must have read my face. Her. I ain't talking about no Star-Spangled One, neither. I'm talking about the Negro National Anthem. I smiled at how she enunciated the word Negro. Then came a breath of relief when it registered. Oh, that. I sat a little taller and nodded. Yes, ma'am, as a matter of fact, I do, beaming like a know-it-all child. Her, looking suspicious. All of them? Ma'am, you heard me. You know all 3 verses? She raised an eyebrow. No chance of getting off the hook with her. I unpuffed my chest. Not all 3 by memory. Well, you need to learn them all by heart. Her pointed at me, especially the last one. Again, I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff that's wonderful that, again, everybody should read. But as an aside, before I get to the 3rd one, I want people to think back to Barack Obama's when Reverend Jesse Lowry ended the benediction with the third verse. And I will always remember watching that and being overcome with tears as he read and recited the third verse. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in thy path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. This is our home. We belong here. We made it, and we will continue here. Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing those powerful words. The article in the chat, so I encourage everyone to go and read the whole thing, as well as the end of the third verse of the Black National Anthem. I think those words are powerful just generally, and if you don't know, church religion is a very large part of the Black community. Like clockwork, I was in church every Sunday from the moment I was born until 18 years old, for sure. Every Sunday, whether I was sick, whether I just didn't want to go, it didn't matter. It was what you did. My grandfather was a pastor, so it resonates with me just hearing the sort of uplift and praise of God carrying us through those really hard times. So Chris, thank you for sharing. Next up, we have a song that was submitted by Kendra, and then we will address, I believe Donovan raised his hand, so Donovan, you'll be up after this. So thank you guys for your submissions, and here we go.
Ever since day one, somebody probably said you wouldn't be none. I bet they told you this over and over again on repeat like a rerun. Nobody ever told you could live up to anything you want, don't give up. They rather tell you you're destined for failure. That's what they tell you. But you should say, what about Martin? What about Robbie? What about Rosa? What about Malcolm? What if somebody told them they would never be nothing and they believed it? Think about the outcome. Will we even be the way we are today? Even if it weren't, could have been a harder way. Even though we lost a lot of people on the way, had to sacrifice to get us in a better place. I hope you listen to these wizards. All they want us thinking about is sipping on some scissors. And they got us thinking something better we don't deserve. And that you shouldn't try is no use. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Don't believe it, that's what they told me to. When I was growing up, they told me. And when I got a little older, they told me, yeah. That's what they told, they told, what they told. That's what they told, what they told, what they told. That's what they told, what they told, what they told. That's what they told, what they told, what they told. They see the ballers and celebrities as a reminder of the people they would never be. Jealousy got them sick without a remedy. Thinking when I die nobody gon' remember me. I was told that nobody cared, so the dreams that I had touch on nightmares. Cause this thing called life really ain't fair. Need help but it ain't there. So you know it's really hard to stay dedicated. When the ballers screaming they was never educated. On the corner getting high just to medicate. Cause the teacher just told him he would never make it. Now he feeling like he made it cause he's stacking paper. We probably won't let us spend the money later. Nobody ever told us we could be greater. Everybody on the grind in a paper chase. I hope you listen to these wizards. All they want us thinking about is sipping on some scissors. And they got us thinking something better we don't deserve. And that you shouldn't try is no use. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Don't believe it, that's what they told me to. When I was growing up, They told me and when I got a little older, they told me, yeah. That's what they told me, they told me, they told me. That's what they told me, that's what they told me, they told me, they told me. They told me, they told me, they told me. They'd rather see me dead, never gonna make it. They'd rather see me fail, never gonna leave. They'd rather see me in jail. What make you think everybody dies? You ain't shit, but not everybody lives. But I know that somehow you can make it out of this. You ain't tell me shit. You just gotta tell yourself that somehow I'ma make it.
Thank you for sharing that song, The American Dream. So much you can say about what the American dream looks like and what the reality is for people in our country, particularly for our Black and Brown folks, and how unattainable that can feel. So appreciate you sharing that with us today. I want to call out Donovan, who had his hand raised and who's been waiting. Donovan, do you want to come off mute and share?
Hey y'all, so my name is Donovan and I'm at the Chicago office. I just really wanted to lift up like all of the Black and LGBT folks, especially since it is Pride Month. I think that it's important to like acknowledge that Pride was started by like Black trans women, and they really fought for my right to be here and to exist. And I think often in these conversations that we've been having over the past few weeks, how trans folks have been killed and how their names aren't in the larger news. People don't acknowledge them, and I just really hurt for my community, and I feel that for the Black straight community, I just ask that y'all show up for us, that y'all like support us because we've been supporting y'all. I just wanted to lift us up and just to say that we're here, that and that we've always been here. And I'm thankful to be at this intersection where I used to think that I had to choose my race over my sexuality. I celebrate both of those things because that's who I am. And I think that's something to like always be proud of. So thank y'all.
Thank you, Donovan, so much for sharing those words. Happy Pride to you and to everyone else. I have nothing to add. You said it perfectly. So thank you for bringing that into this space. I appreciate you for that. We have another song that was submitted. I know we have a couple other people who raised their hands, so thank you so much for your engagement. Tarnisha posted a song in the chat. Apparently it is also Black Music Month, so she submitted a song that is considered house music that was created in Chicago by Frankie Knuckles. In the club scene, it looks like it's from the 80s. Or no, this song was made in the 90s, but made the genre more popular in the 80s. So I will share my screen with y'all. And here we go.
Follow me, 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 yeah, follow me. I'm hoping to see the day when my people can all relate. We must stop fighting to achieve the peace that was taught in our country. We shall all be free. Follow me. Why don't you follow me to a place where we can be free? Come with me over there. Let's put an end to racial hatred and let's learn to share. Can you feel it? It's in the air. Now it's time for changes. Time for us to care. Follow me. Why don't you follow me to a place where we can be free? Yeah.
Danisha, thank you for sharing that song. I had not heard it before, but I was feeling it and I have my lights behind me, so I was definitely over here grooving, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Divinity who wanted to share this. So Divinity, I invite you to come off your mic.
Hey, Alex. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, I'm just going to start with, this is uncomfortable for me. I'm very accustomed to addressing these issues, but not in mixed company necessarily. And so my hat is off to everyone who has spoken. And yeah, just bear with me. So I just wanted to elevate the fact that white people and Black people in this country have been living in disparate realities. And a lot of that has to do with the failure of the American educational system and the erasure of Black history. So my minor in college was African American Studies. My fellowship was in Africana Studies. And I just wanted to encourage my colleagues, but my white colleagues in particular, to look up a few instances of history that I'm going to outline. And I'm going to try not to take too much time, but one of them is look up who we consider to be the founder of modern gynecology today. This is a person who actually practiced on his slaves without any anesthesia. But this is the person that we herald for being the founder of modern gynecology. The second thing that I encourage you to look up is the eugenics movement. We commonly think of science as being very objective, but the eugenics movement was dedicated to proving that Black people were inferior. I would also encourage you to look up the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. The Tuskegee syphilis experiments was a government-sanctioned experiment, like most research in America, which, unbeknownst to these Black men, gave a cohort of Black men within Tuskegee syphilis to see what would happen to them. During the Clinton administration, there was a formal acknowledgement and apology of this. But of course, the damage and the lives had already, the damage had been done and the lives had already been taken. Next, moving into the 50s, 60s, 70s, I'd encourage you to look at the forced sterilization of Black women, unbeknownst to them. So Black women would go to the gynecologist, to the hospital to give birth, and or for a standard procedure, and without informing them all the way through the 60s and 70s, as I said, they had been sterilized without their consent. Next, I would encourage you to look up not just Brown versus Board of Education, which we're all familiar with, but I encourage you to look at Brown too. So Brown versus Board of Education determined that we would integrate the American school system, as you all know, but Brown too actually determined how we would integrate the American school system. And the exact language that was used is that we would integrate with, quote, all deliberate speed. And what that did is that it allowed school systems through today to use tokenism as a way to say that they had integrated. So if they put one Black student in a school of 300 students, it was determined that that was their effort to integrate with, quote, all deliberate speed. And so I share these examples because they impact us in significant ways to this day. It's the reason why many people of color do not have a positive relationship with the medical industrial system, because we are aware of how we've been manipulated and how our Black bodies have been used for the benefit of the rest of society without our consent. And so again, I just encourage, I encourage everyone, if you're not familiar with some of these instances, but particularly my white colleagues, to look into these particular instances. And there's many, many more. But I think this will give you a perspective on why we are where we are today.
Divinity, thank you so much for sharing that information with us. I think it's so important to really think about that fact that the history, we're not the ones who are writing these history books, right? And so our history has been whitewashed. It's been, the way that they talk about it, they put a positive spin on it, whatever, they do all of the things so that the reality of what our people, what our ancestors have had to go through, the average person receiving a public education, even a private education, just doesn't get. So I don't know what the first step necessarily is to getting that to change, but I definitely think it is important because you know, if you don't talk about these things, how are you going to be someone who can affect change? And if our children aren't learning this, and by our children, I mean Black children, brown children, white children, if we're not all learning what our history really is, then how do we know that we have action that we still need to take? So I appreciate you bringing that into this space today. I saw
Thanks,
that
Alex, for hosting this.
Yes.
Thank you so much for hosting this forum. I know a lot of work went into it, so thank you again.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with everyone. I know we have a couple other people who raised their hand. I do want to make sure that I have a chance to also get to a few of the other people who submitted in advance. So I will bring up one of those for you guys now. Just a second. Share my screen with you.
Well-being means to exist in a place where you are acknowledged, surrounded by co-workers or peers who encourage your growth and development. Welcoming environments where you feel safe and secure. Free to carry out your dreams and live beyond your expectations. Equality, and have the ability to be outspoken. Free to be whoever you want to be without offending anyone.
That submission was from one of our students named Sabrina Hart. And then I'm going to play this one from Evelise.
Hi, my name is Evelise, and I am an Access Advisor in the Chicagoland region, and today I will be citing a poem called Hey Black Child. Hey Black Child, do you know who you are, who you really are? Do you know you can be what you want to be if you try to be what you can be? Hey Black Child, do you know where you are going, where you are really going? Do you know that you can learn what you want to learn if you try to learn what you can learn? Hey Black Child, do you know you are strong? I mean really strong. Do you know that you can do what you want to do if you try to do what you can do? Hey Black Child, be what you want to be, learn what you want to learn, do what you can do, and tomorrow your nation will be what you want it to be.
Thank you, Evelise, for sharing that with us today. I know, let's see, we had a handful of other hands raised. Let me just scroll through. Uh-oh, did their hands go away? Hands come back. It looks like their hands might have gone away, which is, if I'm mistaken, please feel free to raise your hand again, but I'm not currently seeing them on the participants tab. And in the meantime, I will share my share with you guys. So what do I want to say about this share? Something that is part of Black culture that I've always been drawn to, absolutely loved. It is literally what helped me decide to go to my college that I went to, is stepping. And so for those of you who don't know, stepping is a form of percussive dance that uses the entire human body as well as the voice as the instrument. It's a large part of Black Greek life, whose origins stem from African-American schoolyard song and dance rituals from the early 1900s. I was not a part of Black Greek life, but I was part of a group on campus called Ethos, and which was for Black women and women of African descent, and stepping was something that they did as part of observation of our culture. So I'm going to share this with you. It's also very competitive in the same way that cheerleading has competitions, etc. So does stepping and strolling, which is a sort of a variation of it as well.
We represent again. Jeez Louise. We said we represent the Ice Cold Brothers of AYA. They said, who is that? Who crying? They say, well, we stepping mighty hard in this funky cap. Before we catch them, we know we're gonna break on down he goes. Yeah. Woo! Woo! What? You got one more. You want more? On the show. This show. Ice too cold. Ice too cold. 1906. Hey! Ice too cold. Ice too cold. 1906. Hey! Ice too cold. Ice too cold. 1906. All right.
All right, so that's what I wanted to share with that. It just has so much heart and feeling in it, and you can see just the community that is built around it. So I wanted to share that with you all today. We did have Ryan, who's not able to actually be with us today, who submitted a link to a poem that he wrote. So I'm going to drop it into the link. I'm going to drop the link into the chat for you guys to take a look at it. I'm also going to drop a link to the step video because I heard that the picture was a little unclear at times. I know we're a little bit over time for the session, so I don't want to eat into people's stretch breaks, lunch breaks, etc. I want to thank everyone who shared today. As Black people, Black men and women, and you know, non-binary genders, so that we're all included, that our experiences there are some common threads, but they're so different too. And I think that it is important that we take the time to celebrate one another and to lift up one another. And I think it's important that this space is a mixed space so that we can start having those conversations and leaning into that discomfort that Divinity brought up, because that's the only way that we can start driving that change forward. So I appreciate everyone who joined with us today. I hope that you will join us again at 2 p.m., 1 p.m. Central, for those of you in Chicago, for our panel on allyship. It's going to be fantastic. We have some great questions that were pre-submitted, and I know there's been just a lot of general excitement, so I imagine that the audience is going to have a lot of great sessions as well. So thank you once again to Bottom Line students, Bottom Line board members, external stakeholders, corporate partners, etc., who joined with us today. We'll see you again at 2 p.m. Bottom Line staff, it's lunchtime, so head on over to your calendars. There's a separate link for that. Steve, we look forward to being with you in community and chatting about Bottom Line. Thank you guys so much.
Chained, you know the angels in hell.
One day, they said, "Girlfriend, how in the world can a brown cow eating green grass gonna turn around and give us some white milk?" I said, "Well, I don't know about that one, but one thing that I do know that God's chemical laboratory of redemption took my black soul stained with sin and plunged me in red blood, the blood of Jesus, and I came out white as snow. Yes, I did. The angels in heaven done sign. Oh, my name.
Thank you for letting me take y'all to church for that song. As I mentioned in one of our earlier sessions, religion, going to church is such a huge part of the Black community. And I swear you can only find a voice like that in a Black church. So I felt like I had to bring some of that energy into our celebration today and into our session as well. So first off, welcome to this final session of Bottom Line's first annual Juneteenth celebration. Some of you have been with us since the beginning of today. Some are just tuning in, but you are all, of course, welcome. For those who don't know me, my name is Alexandra, and I work on the career team out of our New York office, and I'm going to be your host for this session. We're really excited about this panel. I know we still have some folks signing in. So as you sign in, please remember to mute yourselves, turn off your videos as well if they're not already turned off, your videos, so that the panelists can clearly be seen. And while we wait for people to finish signing in, I want to start us off with a little bit of an icebreaker. So I'm going to ask you guys to respond to the following prompt in the chat. On a scale of 0 to 5, how comfortable are you with talking about race? So rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 5 with how comfortable you are talking about race, with 0 being I'd rather not talk about it, to 5 being I am very comfortable talking about it. go ahead, just drop a number in the chat. You know, we'll take a look and sort of read the room a little bit. There are no right answers. Everybody is here to engage in conversation and learn from one another. I see someone posted an 8 on a scale of 0 to 5. I like that energy. Thank you to those who are putting in those 2s. Not quite a, I don't want to talk about it, but it's hard to talk about. I appreciate that, and I hear that for sure. Even as a Black woman, it can be very hard to talk about as well. So you're not alone in that. Definitely see a lot of 4s, a lot of 3 to 4 ranges and 5s as well. So that's great. Depends on the context. That's very important too. We're definitely a society where some things you don't talk about with certain people just because you already know how that conversation might go, or it's just not something you're comfortable with at the time. So definitely hear that. For anyone who's just joining us, we're responding to a prompt in the chat to rate how comfortable you are talking about race on a scale of 0 to 5, with 0 being I'd rather not talk about it, and 5 being I'm very comfortable. So go ahead, I'll give about 1 more minute for people to respond as we wait for final folks to trickle in. Mostly with other people of color, that makes sense for sure. I hear it. See some 3s coming in. 3 is probably my favorite answer anytime I'm asked to rate something because it's very neutral. It's kind of non-committal, not to call anybody out, but sometimes when I can't quite, when one of those feels just a little too intense, I kind of go with that 3, so I hear it. I hear it. All right, well, thank you to everyone who responded. Feel free. That's a great point. Being comfortable talking about it and listening to it, but not wanting to take up space meant for people of color. Appreciate you putting that out there. Go ahead, browse the chat, look at other people's reflections. While you do so, I'm just gonna kick us off. As y'all know, we have a really exciting mix of panelists for you this afternoon. But before I have them introduce themselves, I briefly want to go over the norms that we use internally at Bottom Line when engaging in discussion and learning spaces. So the 4 norms that we're going to focus on today are respect others. That's key, just us all being human beings, just generally, but particularly in this space where conversation might get difficult. Listen actively, for sure. This is a learning environment. We all have things to share, but we all have room to grow. Take risks, but recognize limits. There's been a lot of upheaval recently in the Black community, a lot of death. There've been a lot of protests, and I know that it's not only the Black community that is angry about what is happening. So participate as much as you feel comfortable. If you feel the need to step back a little bit from the conversation, that's all right too. And then, of course, last but not least, challenge ideas, not people. As I said, we're here to learn and grow from one another. We know that we're in a learning space, so let's keep that at the forefront of our minds as we move through today. As I mentioned before, I know that sort of as a polite society, we often shy away from heavy topics like race, but I want us to use today to lean into some of that comfort and use this as an opportunity to learn and grow from one another. That said, I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves really briefly, so you guys can tell us your name, your current role, and brief background of any relevant social justice work that you'd like to share, and then any aspects of your identity that you would like us to know. Anyone in particular want to kick it off?
Sure, I can go first.
Awesome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. My name is Lily Wandusen. I am a Bottom Line alum, first and foremost. I currently work at Pfizer as a Global Health and Patient Access as a manager for their corporate responsibility group, but now we're currently called Global Health and Patient Access. I'm happy to talk about what that means offline, so if you have any questions, please let me know. In terms of identifying myself, I like to identify myself as an Ethiopian American woman. I was born in Ethiopia, but I've been in the country for about 20 years. And so it's been interesting just identifying and having that dual identity in this crisis. In terms of the social justice work, I'm a fierce advocate for maternal health care in developing countries, and enjoy uplifting the voices of our women, specifically in East Africa.
Very good.
Thanks, Lily. I also want to introduce myself. My name is Charlene Lansico. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and I'm currently in Brooklyn right now. I am a Afro-Caribbean American, so my mom is from Haiti and my dad is from St. Lucia, and so that's how I identify myself, but I also identify myself as an African American as well, and just Black, so there's a lot of different identities. I've done a lot of social justice work. I went to NYU, and while I was at NYU, I helped to create a mentorship program for young women of color, and it's still going on right now. It's called NYU Reaching Out, and that program definitely helped me throughout my college years, and I'm very passionate about mentoring young women of color and women in general. And I also was a director for the Sadie Dash Leadership Project, which also does a lot of social justice work in regards to young women of color. And so that is my main focus.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
I can go next. I'm Max Claremont. Born and raised in Boston, Latin Academy and Bottom Line class of 2007. I'm now in the western part of the state, but I've lived a whole bunch of different places. Most of my career, I have a background in public health, but most of my career has been focused on trying to change our political leadership and changing who makes decisions. And so I spent a couple years co-founding an organization called Data for Black Lives in Boston. And now I work for the mayor of Holyoke, who is embarking on a congressional campaign in the western part of the state.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Hey, y'all. This is Elizabeth Wynn, she and her good. I work for the National Bail Fund Network, a network of folks who do community-based interventions in the criminal punishment system and also the immigration system. And I'm also a volunteer with a local immigration bond fund here in Boston. I'm not from Boston, grateful to have been here for about 10 years, born and raised in the South and the Midwest. On my father's side, Vietnamese. He was a refugee who came to this country. My mother's side, white, Irish, German, from Seneca Nation land. And just glad to be here. Have learned so much over many years from young people doing work for social justice.
Thank you for joining us today.
I also forgot to tell you guys my role. I think I didn't say I'm actually a nurse, so I forgot that part, but I just wanted to clear that up.
Thank you. Thank you. So as I said, we have an amazing mix of people on our panel today, and we're going to jump right in so that we can get to the heart of the matter. So just a quick note of logistics. We're going to start with some of the moderated questions, and then we'll open up to the audience. When we open up to the audience, we'll invite you to come off camera to ask your question yourself. So my first question is for Max, Charlene, and Lily. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about how you define an ally. What does an ally look like to you? And can someone who is non-Black, because that's what our focus is for today, can they self-define themselves as an ally, or is this a title that should be given to them?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think I personally identify an ally as someone who is not a representative of underserved communities, who takes an active role and leverages their privilege and power to uplift people who may not have the same opportunity given to them, given to other people in their company. And I like to think that a lot of the decisions and the calibrations and the money moves are discussed behind closed doors. And those people tend to be people that don't look like us, and have extreme privilege and power. And you can certainly be an ally by just using your opportunity to mention someone that's doing a great work and building that reputation for them by just voicing or name dropping them in that meeting room, where you can be a sponsor or a champion for them. You don't even have to be a self-defined ally, but by just doing that, you've created a space for them to be highlighted or promoted or given an opportunity to be challenged in a different parts of their role. So I think it doesn't have to be self-defined. It can just be as natural as, dropping a name or congratulating them on the work that they do, not microaggression way, but for the sake of the fact that they actually did a great job. So I think it doesn't have to be self-identified. It can actually just be something that you do naturally within your day-to-day.
Yeah, I agree with the last point about day-to-day. And the one thing I've heard ally mentioned almost so many times in the last couple months or last month than probably the last year. And I think the one thing I want to caution against it is just this idea that it might be like a title, that it might be like some certificate or graduate degree that you get, and really thinking about how there's not really I don't think there's like an endpoint. I think ally is just changing how you thinking about how you use your voice. And I spend a lot of time saying it's okay. Allyship is also just having a lot of questions and not enough answers. And I think the best way to think about allyship is starting with where you are, like your close proximity, thinking about who's around the table, who's not, whose voices get lifted up, and who doesn't, and then thinking about what are you going to do to make it better. And then I think to some extent, thinking about how your allyship continues when folks are not watching, when the stakes are not high, and when you're not getting rewarded for it, or there's no kind of accolade. So I think it's really about behavior, asking questions, digging in and learning, and being honest about what you don't know, and getting close to the people who do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I piggyback on what Lily and Max said. I'm going to open up and say I'm currently dating a white guy, and yesterday we actually had a very deep conversation about allyship, because it was very hard to figure out, I think for him, how to hold space for me while at the same time being able to be comfortable in his whiteness. And so one of the things that I talked about was performative social justice work, which is something that I feel I've experienced throughout just friendships and just people in general. And so I cautioned him not to do things that were performative. So one of the things he had asked me was, should I post something on Facebook? Like how do you want me to kind of address the things that are happening right now in America? And I personally don't have social media. I'm not against people who do, but I don't have it just because when I did have it, I found myself to be performative as well. And so I think sometimes performative social justice work is not just about white people doing allyship work. It's also about people of color can possibly have the role of wanting to do allyship but not doing it correctly, and it becomes self-centered. And so one of the things that I told him, because I am a devout Christian, is doing the heart work and making sure that your intentions are pure, and that it's coming from a place of sincerity and not from a place of narcissism. And so that's just something I've been reflecting on. But I think if your heart, if it's coming from the heart, then it's it's more valuable for me than if it's coming from a place of, oh, look what I'm doing great things for Black people or brown people or people of color, and I'm an ally. So I also don't think that people should necessarily say I'm an ally. I think it's very tricky when you do that, because what if you interact with another person of color and they don't feel like you're an ally? So I think it's a very complex word to use, and I think it's sometimes used inappropriately.
I think you guys bring up some really great points in response to that question. One of them just being the idea of allyship as a continuous process. It's not like, oh, I did these 5 acts, now I can be considered an ally and my work is done. It's a constant state of showing up, creating space, putting people's names forward, and uplifting. So I appreciate you guys bringing that. Charlene, I especially resonate with that idea of performative allyship, performative social justice. It's definitely something that even I myself have struggled with. Something I mentioned in another session is how, I see everyone going out to protest and putting their physical body on the line, and I have never felt like that is a space that I wanted to put myself in. And so how do I, as a Black woman who is directly affected by everything that goes on, showing up for my community and creating space for other people to also show up and have voice. So thank you for bringing up those points, and that kind of leads me into my next question. If you or Max or Lily can share a successful example of allyship that you've either witnessed or were on the receiving end of.
Max, you want to go?
I just wanted to respond. Yeah, I'll respond to that in a second, but I'm with you on the protest thing. I got many invitations to go to the protest, but I'm not a protest person. But you'll find me on the other end when you come back from the protest, and you'll see me the days after to see if whatever you did at the protest, whatever sign you held, are you putting it into practice, right? And are you thinking about not just showing up for the protest, tagging your people on social media, but like the stuff I talked about earlier, kind of like how you continue this kind of work, because the performative stuff is tricky. But I also think I also view going to a protest as an action of allyship. I think putting yourself at risk is allyship. Putting the black square on Instagram for Blackout Tuesday, that's not a bad thing to do. And so I think that's important. Examples of allyship, it's interesting because the tough part for me over the last, and we talked about this in the pre-remarks, has been like, I lead a team that's like 95% white. And I think because I'm the leader, I think there's some questions to ask. Hey, like you had control over the representation here, and it still ended up being white, which is something I should think about. But I think there's been this responsibility, like when this stuff is going on, for you to be the person that helps. You have to lead this team, but also be the person that's helpful in helping them educate themselves and pointing them to materials, but also trying to figure out the best way to kind of deal with this stuff on your own. And one of the things that that happened recently was the candidate I worked for, the mayor, Alex Morris, decided to like organize a meeting where I wasn't included, and basically brought all the white people together and said, and intentionally left me out the meeting. It was like, hey, we're gonna convene and talk about amongst ourselves about the kind of work we need to do and what this moment means and how we respond as a team, and not putting the burden on Max, because he's the black guy here, to be the one who like leads and guides. And I thought that was, I didn't tell him to do that, I didn't ask him to do that, but like him like stepping up in that way was powerful. And the great thing is the person who's gonna like, that the fact that he's involved and other people are taking ownership of this, and like I'm not the one who needs to review statements about Juneteenth that are going out today. I'm not the one who needs to think about how we respond to this protest, but that everyone's thinking about doing the education they need to respond to it, and not like, oh, let's run this by Max. Let's do our own work so we can like represent this issue in the way that it needs to be represented. I thought that was powerful.
Yeah, for me, I think So I work for a huge pharma company, which on itself is going through an interesting time with COVID and addressing, the vaccine issue and things like that. So for me, allyship came in the form of being a young person in my company. A lot of the folks that were working at Pfizer, that are working at Pfizer, have been with the company for 10 plus years. Folks on my team have been on my team for 20 plus years. So it came in the form of, she's a very young person, but she's a lot to offer, even though she might not have the exposure, the tenure, the experiences that a lot of the people had on this team. And so, a couple of months ago, I had two great opportunities that were presented to me. One, I knew for sure was fiercely advocated by an ally that wasn't my manager, and my manager is actually Black. So it came in the form of basically coming with a cohort of people that were deemed to be, were on the right track to be successful and wanted to be retained with the company, and they were called get to know people. And so it was colleagues who were deemed to be effective workers, and that leadership should get to know them. And so that was, for me, a really great exposure to get to know some of the LT members. And the other was essentially going on a 3-week trip to Ghana to assess the marketing plan and health needs for a maternal health care clinic. So those things I know for sure were fiercely advocated for me, even though I was less than a year within the company. And a lot of people came to me and said, how did you get this opportunity? You haven't been here for even a year. And so I appreciated someone sticking out their neck for me, telling me I'm capable, even though I haven't been here as long as some of my other colleagues. So I think I still face that, struggle of being young, Black, and a woman at a big corporate company, but I appreciate the allies.
Charlene, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Lily and Max said. I also wanted to kind of share a quick anecdote of something that I had experienced while I was at Yale. I had a couple of racist experiences, and I do remember one particular young white woman that was a great ally for me, and the way that she was able to do that for me was when I was in certain situations that were uncomfortable and I didn't want to speak up about certain things because I didn't want to be that angry Black woman or all the other stereotypes that sometimes comes with what it means to be Black. She would stand in that space for me, and not in the way of speaking for me, but communicating to her other white friends how certain things may make me feel. And so sometimes it's easier for white people to educate other white people about what they're doing than for me as a Black woman to do that kind of education, because that's taxing for me emotionally. And also because of white supremacy, there's this kind of, stereotype that Black people don't know what they're talking about. So in being an ally, being able to use that privilege to help communicate some of the things that I could also communicate, but I am not able to because of the fact that I'm a Black woman.
Thank you. I think you all raised such important points. Really just this idea of Black people sort of always being the representative of their race in whatever space that they're in, and having to sort of sign off on things or be the voice of yay or nay, not just as a person, but as, like I am Black America, essentially, and just the emotional weight and totally, as you said, that puts on us. And I appreciate that idea of asking people who are truly allies to step into that education space. And so if they witness a moment where that burden is being put on us to speak from that place, not to speak from our place, but to speak in support of an allyship. So I appreciate all of those thoughts that you just shared. I have one final question before I turn it over to the audience to get some of their questions up. And this one I'd like to ask to Elizabeth. This question was actually submitted by one of our attendees in advance. I wanted to ask it specifically to you as a woman of color who is also white presenting. This person asks that they found with conversations with white family and friends that they always tend to move through predominantly white spaces, whether it's where they work, whether they've gone to school, where they lived, and not because they're necessarily trying to other themselves, but just because it's what's familiar, so it's where they're comfortable. So what are some ways they might be able to be intentional about diversifying the spaces that they move through?
Yeah, thank you. I want to say a few things about the question. So that is by design. In this country, white supremacy has shaped the structures of our lives, from where we live to where we go to school, to what form of transportation we take, to where we work. Many of us are part of trying to transform that and change that, but it's not an accident that many people experience themselves as being surrounded by people, particularly white folks or upper class wealthy white folks, being surrounded by other upper class wealthy white folks. And I think it's really important to understand that that's not an accident, that that's how this country has been shaped since the genocide of indigenous people here and since the enslavement of African folks to build the wealth of this nation. I think diversity is really complex. Robert Diaz, who is an anti-racism trainer, sometimes says, what can be an intense thing to hold, but she'll say the plantation was a diverse workplace, and that it's not about diversity in terms of identities, it's about who has power. And I think in our contemporary context, like we could say our prisons are really diverse, or our farms are really diverse, or the places where fish is processed, or the places where things are cleaned are really diverse. But who has the power in those contexts, and whose rights and thriving and survival is given the most priority? So I think I push back a little on the idea that like diversity is our goal. I think exposure to many truths in the world is really important, but in my mind, liberation and justice are our goal. And for some of us, that means widening the truths and life experiences that we're exposed to. But I think we need to be really careful about the trap that the presence of people of different races, sexual orientations, class backgrounds, gender expressions, that the presence means that we've reached liberation or equity.
Thank you. I think you made such an important point about it's not just the identities that we hold, but it's the distribution of power and how we are able to have our voices heard and mattered in those spaces. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to, because unfortunately we have a limited time, I feel like we could have a panel on this literally all day and never run out of things to talk about, but I want to open it up to the audience and see if anyone has a question they would like to ask the panelists. Just go ahead and raise your hand, and we will invite you to come off mute and share your screen so we can see your face as you ask. All right, I see Jaden has their hand up. I shouldn't assume, I apologize for that. Jaden, why don't you go ahead?
All right, so I really don't look presentable now because of the quarantine, but I actually had a question for Max. I want to get into politics, but I'm actually having like a hard time of like where to start exactly, because I'm actually going to graduate college within the coming year. So I wanted to know like any advice or like any pointers you can give for someone that's because I'm 20 years old. I'm going to be 21 within like 5 to 6 months. What advice could you give me on like getting my foot in the door, or just really like learning about it, like learning how to maneuver through the entire system of it?
Great. No, I think it's when I think about the problems we have as a country and what it's going to take to match, make sure we have, the right scale of solutions. I think there's really a role for political and civic leadership. So it's great that you're thinking about it. it's to be honest, it's really tough. And I think for me, I had a relationships matter a ton, and so I hope we can like kind of get connected after this, because I want to learn a little bit more about what your interests are and then figure out how I make sense of the space and people I know and really advocate for you, because it really takes that kind of intentional advocacy to get the support you need. But oftentimes, I think the best place to start is trying to figure out being open-minded about where you go and what you do. I think many people interested in campaigns are like, oh, I want to be a campaign manager, or I want to be a chief of staff, or I want to be, run for office. And I think I love that kind of aspirational stuff, but there's also some part of like getting in there, learning about how systems work, building relationships, because it's a relationship driven. Someone you might be working for today might be doing the hiring for the next job, because of just how folks kind of move around the political space. But I often recommend, especially when you're 2021, especially in a year like this, when you have a lot of campaigns going, a lot of national, like try to work on a campaign. I think the great thing about working on a campaign, presidential, local, is in many cases you might have one title, like you're doing the organizing, or you're working on communications, or you're working on political. But like, because teams are kind of dynamic and a lot of moving parts, you get exposed to all different facets of the political world. And you learn a lot about how decisions are made, how money is used, and how policy is made. So I think like starting on a campaign level or starting as an intern in an office is a good thing to do. And then at some point, I think you have to have some clarity around like what issues you care the most about, and what are the places where you can have the most influence over that issue and that cause. And so happy to connect offline about how to like actually turn what I said into a plan. But like, I've been in the game since I just turned 31. I know I don't look it, but I've been in the game since about 20 myself. And so I'm happy to be helpful.
Thank you so much. I'll connect with you as well.
Thank you for that question, Jaden. Next question from the audience. I know we have a lot of information that's already been presented and a lot to process.
I had one comment based on something you said, Alexandra, because I think the reason why I'm kind of uncomfortable being the like, oh, go to the Black person, is because I think I'll fall short, because there's so much depth and breadth to the Black lived experience here and the intersectional identities that like, and I'm operating from a point of privilege. Like, I have education, I have a graduate degree, I have access to a lot of white people, have access to a lot of power, right? And so, and like, I have to think about like, because I have a certain amount of privilege, there's ways that I can be a better ally too, and advocate. And so I think the reason why it's hard for me to take on this work of like doing all the education and stuff is it's going to be limited and narrow, and it might not be as comprehensive as like what you need. So like, I'm happy to be part of the team of educators for you and the team of people, but it can't fall all on me, because that's just, I will fall short, because I have my own stuff I'm trying to deal with, and I'm trying to get you to a better place. Mm-hmm. And then I've been watching Good Morning America lately. I don't know why, but I've been starting my mornings with TJ Holmes, and he had a special once, and he said, while all of America is trying to figure out how to survive the pandemic, Black Americans are trying to figure out how to survive the day, right? So like these, like, I went from thinking about the pandemic, thinking about when the hell stuff is going to open up. I'm working on a campaign, so I'm like, when are we going to be able to knock doors? And then George Floyd and Ahmaud, and you're like, wow, now I have to think about how I'm going to survive the day. Mm-hmm. How am I supposed to do all this education, all that stuff for you, when I got to do all that, so learn how to survive the day? So I just think I'll fall short if I get all that responsibility. I'll do my best, but I have to be honest about my own capacity as well, and I think we all do.
Yeah. Something I want to add to that I really want everyone here to hear, particularly non-Black identifying people, is that as a Black person in America, you never get to walk away from this. that fear of whether or not you're going to make it through the day or someone you love is going to make it through the day never actually leaves you. I myself operate from a place of privilege. Like he said, I've traveled extensively. I hold multiple degrees. I speak multiple languages. And at the end of the day, it still comes down to me being a Black woman. And the fact that I can never separate myself from that just puts me in a very different place than non-Black identifying people. So I encourage everyone, you know, when we eventually close for the day, that you hold on to that and take that knowledge back with you into the spaces that you navigate. We do have another hand from the audience. So Darnisha, I'm gonna invite you to ask your question.
All right, my question is for Charlene. Just kind of want your opinion on this, especially being a Christian. I'm also a Christian as well. And so being in the church, you know, it's always been like constant conversation or debate about, you know, is racism a gospel issue? Should this be a should this be an issue that Christians should be in the front lines about and things like that? But my specific question is just kind of what does allyship look like in your opinion in the church, especially of course for you know, non-Black Christians, and is it any different from, you know, allyship with, you know, non-believers who are non-Black?
Thank you so much for that question. I actually help run a Sabbath school group, and so we have these conversations all the time, and we're always learning and growing in terms of how to best make sense of it. I currently go to a multicultural church in New York City, and my pastor is white. And in February, before the movement that we just currently had, we had a book club where we were reading the book, How to Be Anti-Racist. And we had several conversations about it, but I felt what was missing was the Christ part. I felt like there was, I did think the book was useful in many ways, but I thought that there was a lot more for me as a Christian, secular humanism, this idea that as human beings that we're going to be able to fix racism. And personally for me as a Christian, I think that racism is due to the fall of man and the idea that we are of a sinful nature. And so in terms of how do I address it with non-Black people in church, I think about love. I start there. I start from the root of love and what that means in the Bible. And then also understanding that when you understand how Christ loves us, and also understand how identity impacts human beings in this world, I think being able to combine the two is where I've been able to find some kind of resolve in the issue, is understanding that personally for me, it can be psychologically draining. And so in order to deal with it, I have to understand what love means to me. And so if I practice the love in the Bible, the love that is kind and pure and gentle and of self-control, and I'm able to have those healthy conversations with non-Black people of color, or just white people as well. Because I do think that in terms of allyship, I think the conversation is not always just about white people. It's also non-Black people of color as well. Because I've also had to kind of engage in those conversations, and also Black people, because it's very complex. And so to answer your question, I think when it comes to church and making sense of racism, the best way that I've been able to understand it and make sense of it is coming from a place of love. And I don't think that every person can be an ally. I don't think that everyone is a good person. I do not believe that. I do think that there is evil in this world. And so I'm not naive in the sense that I'm going to think that everyone I'm going to come into contact with is going to want to be an ally, is going to want to fight for racism. I understand that. And so I try my best to make sure I'm interacting with people who generally want to impact and make changes in this world.
Thank you.
Excellent question, excellent thoughts. Any follow-up thoughts on that, or another question from the audience? If not, I do have a question I'd like to ask Max, because you talked a little bit, you touched on this idea of the privilege that you hold. And so I recognize that you are a Black man in America, but I also recognize that you are a man in America. So I was hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about that intersection of those two different identities and how you sort of navigate those within the spaces you move in.
Yes, that's something I think about a lot. And I think one of the questions I saw was kind of like, Black man, white man, and kind of Black woman, Black man kind of dynamics. And I think in many cases, I think there's I have to be very careful as a Black man in majority white spaces. I literally have to watch the language I use, make sure I don't pop off, and make sure that I'm approaching, engaging in people in a way that makes them feel safe, that's not threatening. And so that's something I actually actively think about. I was in a meeting once, and someone on my team mentioned something about slaves, working like slaves. And I was like, excuse me? And I had a reaction. And part of me, I looked back at that, I was like, yo, I wonder if I could have, it was in the middle of a team meeting, she made that reference. And usually I'm a little bit careful, and I kind of let that moment pass and then address it afterwards one-on-one. But I think it was important for people to see in real time, the impact of that kind of language. And I had to react in a way that was real. But the one thing I think about a lot is in many cases, I've been lucky because I've actually worked at a lot of organizations where Black women are leading. I mean, the nonprofit Day for Black Lives, founded by a Black woman who I have a lot of respect for. I take my orders from Black women in this space, especially in the social justice movement, because when you think about who's recording the videos of the Black men being killed, Black women. When you think about who's bailing them out, who's going to court every day for them, Black women. And so I think, but I also notice even though they're in places of leadership positions, there are ways that they're undervalued and undermined. And I use my privilege as a male to make sure that I can lift them up, lift up their work, make sure I give visibility to what they're doing, behind the scenes that people don't recognize and that people don't honor. And so, and then it coming from me as a male, even though I'm in a lower position, makes a difference because I'm a male, right? And it carries more weight. So I actively think about the ways in which I also need to think about, in the same way we talk about white people holding space, me as a male, making sure I'm not holding up too much space. Even in a panel like this, I love the conference calls that tell you get a report back that says how many minutes someone was talking on a conference call, and really pay attention to who's talking and for how long. I think that kind of data, the active kind of is important. And, I know I have a lot of work to do myself around making sure that I hold space for others and the male privilege and all that stuff. So yeah, I think about that quite a bit.
I just want to emphasize one thing you said, and that's the code switching that we have to do in corporate America. You said I have to hold myself from popping off or talking about things in a certain way, and I think it's truly exhausting to do that. It's truly exhausting to, I think, Alexandra, one of your questions was professionalism in the Eurocentric way, and how we have to uphold ourselves to be looked at a certain way or talked to in a certain way, or projecting our voice. And turning on that white voice is a real thing when you pick up the phone. And I think in this day and age, it's truly exhausting to bring a different self to work all the time. Where we spend most of our lives is at work 5 days a week, 9 to 5. And to be stripped of our identity constantly is exhausting. And so I think being present and picking up space in your true identity is as critical as being an activist on, protesting or donating or bailing. That's how you push the agenda. That's how you push the culture. And that's how you allow for others to take up space that come after you. And kudos to you, Max, for calling that woman out. I think it's hard because you don't want to get, reprimanded for doing that to her. So I think being authentically you is as important as being on the front protesting social injustice. So I think the list of code switching is exhausting.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that, Lily, and for your thoughts, Max. Everything that you guys said definitely resonates with me. I think that on top of, Black people having to sort of be the teacher in moments like these, we also have to carry that sort of the emotional weight of white fragility. Like, I don't know how else to put it, but just like, we can't offend them. Like, we have to make sure that like we're talking to them in a way that makes them feel comfortable. And it's like, this is uncomfortable stuff to talk about, like if I have to be uncomfortable every day of my life, you can be uncomfortable for the hour it's going to take us to have this conversation, because that's the only way that we're going to move forward. If, you can walk away from this 364 days out of 365, then like you can listen to me for a day and we can engage in real hard conversation. So I appreciate you guys bringing that up because it completely resonates with me. I know it does with a lot of other Black people as well. I think we have time for one or two more questions. So I see that Veranda has their hand raised. So Veranda, why don't you bring yourself off mute and you can ask your question.
Hi. So my question, I think it could be generally answered by everyone on the panel. And I think, my question is, do you think that it's Black people or non-people or non-Black people, so other people of color, to educate white people on what's happening right now and just racism in general? Like, should it fall on us to be able to do so, or should those people be able to like do the research themselves, basically?
I'll start. I want to say that I think it is important for them to do the research themselves, but I think what happens when they do the research is that what I've come to experience is wanting to teach me the knowledge that they have now learned. And so it's more about gaining all of the knowledge, but the application isn't necessarily there. And then there's also this form of like, I know because I read. And so being able to read about it and research and have that understanding, but knowing that you will never actually be able to empathize with a person of color, and being humble in that, and also being open to having conversations with people of color, because you can read several books, but that's the danger of a single story, is that you're only getting one perspective. But when you're able to have conversations with many different people of color, then you have a more broad perspective on what's going on. But even me as a person of color, I still don't know everything. And so being able to do the research, but being humble in the knowledge that you're attaining.
Yeah, everything you said. And on top of that, because everyone's at such a different place with this, that I almost wish that before folks ask me about resources, and I do my best to use my platform to share. I mean, everything I've tweeted about the last month or so has to have Black in it, and I hope the people who follow me, like, I have a theme, I have a focus right now. That's the only thing I care about. But the second thing is, I wish folks came in, the question you asked in the beginning about 3, 4, 5, I wish everyone had like kind of a score or like a diagnostic test, because I have to, for this to work or for me to be most helpful, I have to know where you're at and where you're not, and to have a sense of like, what do you know, what don't you know? And then also, like, what are you most interested in? Because you have to figure out how whatever education they do has to be relevant to them, or like, because especially with the application piece, because if it's like about something that's like too abstract that they can't make real, or they can't sense how to use it in their like day-to-day life, that could be difficult to kind of get it to resonate and for them to apply it in the way that you need them to. So I don't know. I mean, I know there's like some like racism tests that people can take and stuff like that, but like it would be much better for me if I found a way, because these requests are coming often. I'm like, I wish I could give someone some like diagnostic tests so that I can like be more helpful, because I'm not, it's a balance of knowing where you are and then also understanding what my capacity and knowledge is too. Because in many cases, I might not be able to meet you where you are. It might just be too much work,
Yeah, I like that idea of a diagnostic test. I think there is, we've touched a little bit on this idea of performative acts and, sort of knowing where someone is honestly is good. And so I think there's a danger sometimes that they come looking for validation that they've done the right thing, they've read the right thing, and that's kind of where it stops. So I think, knowing where they really are and where they want to go is a huge part of figuring out if we have the bandwidth or want to, spend the time helping them. So I appreciate that. We do have, I believe, 2 more questions before we end. Edward, you're up next, so why don't you go ahead?
Hi everyone, my name is Edward. I just joined the conversation. I was doing something. I have 2 questions for everyone. So I just finished college and I really didn't know about this day until like a couple of months ago. A lot of people of color do not know about this particular day. So what can we do to raise awareness about this day and how we can change that narrative from us being Black, like knowing our holidays and knowing how important they are. And the second question is, how can we use this moment to kind of heal together as a community, and what ways can we also come together and heal? So I know you guys probably know about Afrofuturism, meditation, all these things, but what can we do as a community to come together and learn new ways to kind of like help us heal each other and kind of like come together and find ways to also like, heal ourselves and find ways to like fight the system. So those are the 2 questions that I have.
Thanks, Edward. I want to answer your second question about healing our community. As I mentioned, I identify as Ethiopian American, and I think having that dual identity has come into question more than ever right now. As an African descent, a lot of Africans don't think themselves to be Black, unfortunately. And I've had a lot of difficult conversations with my family, extended family, on really understanding the root of why they might not think they're Black and identify as Black Americans. And healing really starts within like your family, educating them why it's important to be an ally to Black people. And I start with, if it wasn't for the people that built this country on their backs, we wouldn't have been able to immigrate to this country to access the American dream. And really making them relatable and bringing it to face value and having those tough conversations is how we start healing the community, building this allyship for them to be partners in advancing social justice. So for me, that's how I've been having these conversations with my family. It's been hard because this is years and years of systematic thought and oppression, not just for the years that they've lived in America, but for all the years that they've lived in Africa, where targeted, commercialized movies and song videos have been sent to them that has deemed and vilified Black Americans to be the worst of the worst. And so you're trying to just break that systematic viewpoint of what Black Americans are in this country. So I think healing definitely starts at home, and equipping yourself to be educated and allowing yourself to have those difficult conversations.
Yeah, I've been inspired by the hashtag Black Joy stuff happening. And what we literally, to your second question, what we literally have to do, even though it's a pandemic, and even though we got to do our social distancing, our masks and all that, literally come together. And I had some friend groups, some Black friends from college, like organize a Zoom meeting and got like 10 of us to go on a Zoom for like an hour and a half. And that was like therapy. And I had another friend who was on that. She lives in Atlanta, and I saw her post on Instagram how they started having outdoor concerts there. And at first I was like, yo, why y'all, we still not out of the woods yet with this, right? But she said, yo, I mean, we were in our cars, we like had masks and did a social distancing, but I needed that. I needed to be outdoors. I need to be around my people. Insecure, which just wrapped up the last episode of the season. That's been like, a time for folks to come together around that show and the Black experience. And so whatever I think part of healing is also trying to figure out how there's a lot of just like the images and the protests, that takes a toll on you. But whatever you can find to remind you of your power, of your beauty, of your community's beauty and power, I think that stuff is helpful.
I agree with everything that Max and Lily said. I think for me, I've experienced complex PTSD from some of the racial trauma that I've experienced over from being at PWIs, because I've been at several, and some of them very quote unquote elite. And being that tokenized Black girl, I had to go through like sexual harassment, sexual assault, a lot of different forms of abuse from those experiences. And I would say for me, the healing has been about digging deeper and understanding that some of the things that we see on the surface is only a small portion of what's going on. And so for me, my spiritual walk has helped me tremendously in understanding how to heal my spirit. Because even though I'm in the skin and I love being a Black woman, I do think that a lot of it is also spiritual warfare. And so that's one of the ways that I've been able to kind of make sense of a lot of the things that I've experienced over the short 28 years that I've been on this planet. And so if there's anyone on this Zoom chat that would like to like connect in terms of if they're Christian, or even if they're not Christian, because a lot of my friends are Muslim, Hindu, I have a lot of friends of different faith, but who understand that faith can be a really big part of healing when you're dealing with something like that. So for me, it's been my faith.
A great question and great responses. Thank you so much. As I said, you guys have provided such amazing insight. We've had some really great questions. Unfortunately, we only have time for one more question. So Amanda is going to ask a question. For anyone who has follow-up questions that we weren't able to get to today, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can follow up afterwards sometime in the coming weeks, hopefully with some more insight into that. Amanda, to you.
Hi there. Thank you all. This has been wonderful. Thank you to all the panelists. And I know we're running out of time. I work at Bain & Company. And so myself and Melissa Pena on the call, we have been partnering with Bottom Line. Unfortunately, did not get to have our externship go through because of COVID, but hoping to just extend the partnership as we move along. But my question is that, you know, there's a lot of promises being made in corporate America, especially right now. A lot of big promises, a lot of big, you know, commitments. But those are words right now, and we hope to see action later on. But what would success look like to you guys with all these promises and ambitions being made in terms of diversity, inclusion, and equity, and just overall allyship within the corporate space?
I'll just speak for myself as a non-Black person and say reparations. And I love that this is called allyship in practice, because I think it really is practice. There are a million corporations, a million elected officials saying Black Lives Matter. I want to know who's going to defund the police and move that money into schools, into housing, into healthcare, in the middle of a pandemic, into the things that nurture and grow communities. So that's my answer, but I'm sure other folks have other ones.
Amanda,
oh, go ahead.
Okay. I appreciate that question because I am actually constantly thinking about it. You know, the reality is, to Charlene's point, those are a lot of performative statements and cover-ups because our dollar value matters. You know, these are companies that are coming up and stepping up and saying they care about Black lives because they know how effective our money is. But the reality is, out of like the Fortune 500 companies, 4 of the CEOs are Black. Like, that's unreal to me. And so we really need to think deep and assess what's the succession rate for Blacks to take leadership roles in these companies. Really hold our VPs, our managing directors accountable and say, who's going to take over when you leave? What's your pool looking like? Are you managing somebody? Are you championing somebody? Are you sponsoring somebody that's a person of color? And so really holding your managers and the people that you report to accountable so that their pipeline looks a lot more diverse than it currently is. And so if we start having those tough conversations and making sure that we're increasing the pipeline for the workforce for Black people, then we really get to really uplift the community in a significant way, because there's no reason why for her, the CEOs. There's 4 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies.
I agree with everything that Lily said, and also Max and Lily. One of the things that I wanted to add, or at least a perspective that I've come to realize, is that I don't know if the issue is necessarily getting more people of color into positions of power, because one of the things that I've seen is when, and I don't want to kind of paint a broad stroke, but some of the things that I've noticed is that when people of color do get into positions of power, because we're in a white supremacist system, you adopt the ideologies of the oppressor. And so it's hard to get into positions of power and do what you want when you're in that kind of system. And I don't want it to sound hopeless, but that's kind of the conversation that I've had with my boyfriend, Dan. We talked about Obama being president for 8 years and some of the things that he probably was not able to do within those 8 years for people of color, particularly Black people. And so we had an 8-year, I would say, cover up of having a face of Blackness, but nothing actually happened, at least for me personally, for Black people. And so I don't know if it's necessarily about getting people of color as CEOs, because I think when you do get to those positions of power, there's a lot of silencing of yourself that you have to do in order to be there. So you're kind of like a model, a new form of quote unquote model minority for Blackness. So it becomes very tricky, I think, but I would say that maybe changing the culture is more important than creating more spaces for Black people. Because if we can change the culture of humanity as a whole, then we wouldn't have to adopt certain traits in order to get to positions of power. So it's a very complex question, and it's a lot to unpack, but that's my opinion on that.
Yeah, +1 on that. And the interesting thing I think about too is when you think about, yeah, because like when you're a Black CEO, you gotta make sure you can stay the CEO. So you can't pop off because your board of directors is probably mostly white, and so you gotta keep them happy. I think a lot about like even thinking about starting with the employees you have now, and asking the questions like around like how to support them better. Because I used to be in kind of work a little bit close to like corporate America, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out like, if I was in charge of hiring, my company culture and the systems we have in place, I would not be comfortable hiring a Black person. I'm happy because I think I can find a way to kind of make work for me because I'm already in the door, but it would be a disservice for me to know what the hell is going on in here, what the heck is going on in here, and to like invite another Black person in this culture where I know they're not going to thrive or even survive, right? And so in many cases, I spend a lot of time thinking about what can I do to change the system, change behavior, change culture, so that when Black people do come in, they can stay. And then also just like thinking about, I don't want the most senior person of color to be the head of diversity and inclusion, because the diversity and inclusion should not fall on one person. It should be integrated across departments, have resources, have money, okay? And not just like a nice to have, check the box, we have a diversity statement, and then we're good. And so I think that's important too. And then also I think a lot about get close to the communities that are around you. Bain has offices all over the place. Bain has a big office in Boston. Boston has some of the worst outcomes in this country. People, Democratic state, all this stuff happening, the worst outcomes. Like, learn more about that, right? And figure out how can we position ourselves as a company and our employees to help close the gap, the racial wealth gap, health disparities, and all stuff in our backyard, because you're close to that, right? And even though, you probably live in Back Bay, probably live on, the seaport, you could learn a little bit about what's happening in Mattapan and Dorchester, okay, and how COVID is impacting certain communities over others. So I think there's a lot of interesting questions you can kind of push at your company. But the one thing that one of my political mentors who's connected to Bain actually is Deval Patrick. And Deval Patrick has this quote that says, "The woke need to make room for the still waking. We all need that grace." And that's how I operate in a lot of this work too. Like, yeah, you might consider me on the higher class of woke, but I also know that like there's people who are, who like have the good intentions in mind and want to be helpful and want to be part of this, but they still need, some support. And like how we need to I love what Charlene was saying about love and heart and grace and all that. And I think that can't be lost in this conversation.
I agree with you. I'm sorry. I do agree with you, Max. I also wanted to say one more thing. Max, I had something similar to what the story that you were talking about, someone mentioning slavery or saying like, we're working like slaves. I had something very similar happen to me while I was at Yale. And so I kind of wanted like to address like politics and how, being a part of political parties sometimes can be like a form of slavery in many ways. My mom is from Haiti, and we have a lot of conversations about, the importance of this day, but also the importance of Haiti being the first, country to, get rid of slavery, the most successful revolution, but at the same time there is slavery going on right now in Haiti, right? And so understanding the connection I'm trying to make is like sometimes as Black Americans, we are on different plantations, either the Republican plantation or the Democratic plantation. And every 4 years, it's the same conversation. And so it gets very tricky, and it can get very hopeless for a lot of people in terms of like, well, people say, go vote, right? Go vote for Joe Biden or whatever the case may be. But is that really going to change the things that we're seeing right now, right? Will there be another situation like George Floyd maybe next year or a couple months from now, right? And so the question now becomes, is it about voting? Right? Is it a political thing? So I would really recommend that people really dig deep into some of the things that we're talking about right now, because, and this is not about anyone in particular, but I think for myself, when I was going through my trauma, I had to really stay in my room and try to figure out what is really going on. So trying to see beyond politics, because I think that some of the conversations that we're having is more on the surface. And if we want to fix something so abstract as racism, I think we may need to kind of think on a deeper level. And the last thing I'm going to say, I don't know if anyone have ever seen the movie Get Out. Maybe most people have, but I think that movie, as much as it's a comedy or a horror, I think there's more in that movie than most people don't understand. And I say that as someone who was offered a lot of things at Yale University to be a professor. I was offered a lot of things and I backed out of it because of some of the things that I was able to see. And so I just recommend that. I know everyone here is on the younger end of the spectrum, but I highly recommend that people do research for themselves and not just read what's in the textbook or the books that the New York Times is saying to read, but really dig deep to see what is really going on beyond the surface.
So much information, such a heavy topic. I recognize that we're a little over time. I just want to say thank you so much to Max, Charlene, Lily, and Elizabeth for sharing with us today. You guys have provided some excellent information. As I said, feel free to drop any final questions in the chat. I did want to close us out with a very brief reflection activity. We're going to drop a link into the chat to a Google Doc. I would love it if you guys could just go on the document and write like a one-word reflection of how you're feeling about this panel, about this day. If you've been with us all day or if you're just tuning in, just one word that sort of sums up your response. And then of course, read through other people's reflections. If you see any that resonate with you, go ahead and put a star next to them, just so that we have just a little insight into how y'all are feeling. While that happens in the background, I just want to quickly do some shout outs and thank yous. First and foremost, I want to shout out Susan Shepard from our national office, who helped me with project management, finalizing content, all things email. She was a huge help in keeping me on task and organized, so I really appreciate her for that. Definitely need to shout out Liz Foster and Gianna Mangianaro out of Massachusetts. all the tech, all the things, as well as helping me secure panelists for our awesome panel on allyship in practice. So a huge thank you to them. My friend Catherine Smith from our New York office, who presented the history of Juneteenth during the first session, as well as recorded notes all throughout the day for me. I appreciate her for that. I'm Steve Colon from National, our CEO, of course, for championing this idea with our senior leadership team, as well as starting the conversation of where Bottom Line can do better in terms of not upholding some of those racist structures that we see in places of work, particularly as we work with students primarily of color. Lo Johnson in New York and Terrell James in Chicago, who helps me get the word out to people. I appreciate them so much. Couldn't have done it without them. And of course, I have to shout out Jeanette from New York, Ye from New York, and Kamala from New York, who've also helped me with keeping records, note-taking, who will help me with sharing out after the event. And of course, I need to thank everyone in attendance today. It's been really great to see a rallying of support around the Black community and Bottom Line, and interest in engaging in thoughtful and constructive dialogue about how to be better. I do hope that from our conversations, you see that it's not just about being better, it's about doing better. So action. I hope you're all able to leave today with some food for thought and active ways to to move the needle forward, to continue having conversation, not just with the people of color in your office or your inner circle, but with your family and friends and the larger communities that you move in. So I want to go ahead and thank you all for joining Bottom Line today, for joining me in community. And that wraps up our official programming, what has been a day full of celebration and uplifting of Black voices and reflection. So thank you all so much for joining.